Hello, Lara friends. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this live stream and welcome to this new series behind Laravel. I hope you're all doing all right. And yeah, in this series, I'd like to talk to a bunch of people from the Laravel team about their packages, about their products, and about all the secrets behind those products, how it was creating them. And yeah, of course, I don't want to tell you about that because I have no idea. So I will always have a guest here to, entertain you and tell you about all those little secrets here. So today we're talking about Laravel Reverb with Joe Dixon. And before I bring him in, I want to mention at the end of the interview, we will have a couple of minutes for your questions. So please prepare them. If you write them right now, I probably don't see them. So wait for me later to tell you when to do this. And yeah, please enjoy and please give a little applause and some nice messages and emoji for the man, the myth, Mr. Joe Dixon. Hello, Joe.
Hey, Christoph, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Very, very well, thank you. Yes, thank you for having me. I feel very honored to be the first guest.
Yes, it's it's a little bit special having you here now. And I also love that we can talk about Laravel Reverb because the reactions from people and from the community since you created it, since you released it. I heard a lot about the videos that are created about this tool. So yeah, I'm also happy that we can talk about Laravel Reverb today. So thank you for taking the time. And I know it was a little bit of stressful for you the last couple of hours, so I'm glad you made it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, just a little bit of context shifting today, but we got through it and ready to chat today. So looking forward to it.
That's awesome. So maybe let's start this by first, everybody. Joe has a nice new background behind him. So everything that you can see, all the shelves, all the books, and everything, wasn't there a couple of days ago. So please let him know that this looks really nice, and he did a great job on that. So
Yeah,
congrats,
I
Joe.
just going to chime in and say, Christoph asked me a couple of weeks or so ago if I would come on and do the show, of which I was very excited and really wanted to do it. But I jumped on a call with Christoph, and we looked behind me, and I sort of said, Christoph, I'd love to come on, but I don't want to make it look like I work in a prison every day. So I've got some work to do to work on my backdrop. So yeah, I did that over the last couple of weeks, and I think it's looking quite good. Still some work to do, but way better than it was before.
Yeah, let's show some thumbs up for this work. So you maybe could still work in a prison. We don't know. It just looks nicer now for the video, so that's good. And yeah, I think also before we start, maybe can you tell a little bit about yourself and your work at Laravel? What's your position, what you're doing, and then we dive into Reverb.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Joe. I've been working at Laravel for coming up 2 years in June. For the majority of that time, I've been working on Vapor, Laravel's serverless deployment platform. I still work on that now, but more recently, I've jumped into a little bit of open source stuff and what we're all here to talk about today, Laravel Reverb. So yeah, my time is now split. Still mostly on Vapor, but dipping in and out a bit with kind of open source issues and pull requests on the Reverb repository.
Cool. So yeah, let's dive right into Reverb. Maybe can you tell us a little bit about what is Reverb for people that don't know the tool yet? I'm pretty sure almost everyone will already know about it, but please give a short introduction and then we'll move on from there.
Sure. So for many, many years now, Laravel, the framework itself, has had support for the ability to broadcast the events from the back end of your application to the front end of your application in real time. And it's got a number of different drivers to be able to do that. We support things like Pusher and Ably and other open source alternatives like Sockety. But we never had our own kind of first party package to solve that problem. And so Reverb is basically a WebSocket server, which you can run in your existing Laravel application that kind of provides the glue between the backend code and the front end code for those kind of that real-time messaging between the front and the back end of your application. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, I would say so. So what I find really interesting about WebSockets in general, it's this amazing tool that we have, but still it always felt like it was, I wouldn't say difficult, but it was this kind of burden in order to use it. And it brings those little nice interactions and real life things to your website, but mostly was like, okay, should I use Pusher again, try to install this? There's a little bit of overhead that you had to do in order to do this. And I found myself often, so maybe it's not that important. Do I want to maintain this for this application? Maybe I don't. So in the end, I sometimes ended up just not using it because I wasn't sure. But now with Reverb, it feels like this burden has become a little bit smaller. This step, this way to bring it in, is now a little bit easier. Was this kind of a goal with Reverb, or what was the initial
Yeah,
idea?
definitely one of the goals was that, to make that kind of more seamless and less of a decision-making process. If we can run it alongside our existing Laravel applications, then there is no kind of overhead. There's no need to go out and add additional cost to your project with a third-party provider. And there's no need to go and set up a separate service on your server to manage that yourself. It can all run as part of the same application. So that was, definitely part of the inspiration for building it.
Nice. So when we talk about the beginning, how did it all started? Is it like you came up with the idea? Was it an idea of Taylor, or did you ask Taylor to do this? Who worked on it? So maybe can you tell us a little bit about the beginning of this Reverb story?
Sure. So it actually happened quite a long time ago. I think I started working on Reverb maybe 6 months or so after I joined, maybe not even that. So we're talking
Oh, wow.
end of the summer 2022, sort of 18 months or so ago. And I think at the time I'd heard Taylor on his podcast mention that it would be really cool to have kind of a first party WebSocket offering to offer the community. And I thought that would be really cool because WebSockets is something I like to use when I'm building applications. Like you just mentioned, I kind of like the extra, I don't know, a bit of extra flair that it gives your front end. That kind of real time communication really makes you feel like your application is doing stuff. So I liked it, and so I thought, okay, well, I'll actually write out a pitch. So within Laravel, we use Basecamp. And with Basecamp, you can have the option to write pitches. So internal pitches where you say, I think it would be a really cool idea to build this thing. So I went ahead and wrote that pitch. And then Taylor thought, yep, that sounds good, and gave me the go ahead to start working on it. And that's really how it all came about. So I'd like to say it was my idea, and it kind of was my idea, but I stole it from Taylor originally.
But it's pretty cool. I believe also for Taylor, he's like saying something on the podcast, and then someone picks it up and managed to create this, or just created this initial idea. And did you already go to him with only the idea, or did you already had a proof of concept? Or
No proof of concept. It was an idea. And there were obviously lots of different ways that we could solve that problem. So I don't even remember what was in the pitch now. It was kind of 18 months or so ago. But I don't think we ended up far away from what I initially proposed, although we went round quite a lot of, we went the long way round to get there, if that makes sense.
And it's written in PHP. Is that right?
It's written in PHP. So that's kind of one of the things I hinted at when I said we went the long way around to get there, because kind of one of the early goals of Reverb is that we wanted it to be able to scale so that it can support kind of high traffic applications. And typically for real-time communication, this isn't something that's typically very easy to do with PHP. And so we reviewed a lot of different options, things like JavaScript implementations predominantly. But we ended up back at PHP because it was kind of a happy middle ground. We actually were able to get way more performance out of it than we thought we'd be able to. And PHP is what we all know, it's what we all love, and it's what we all write in internally, predominantly within Laravel and the team. And so we wanted to stick with something that we were comfortable writing in and wouldn't become a burden to maintain. So that was kind of one of the key things. But also for people within the community to be able to contribute, I think it was important to have it in PHP.
Yeah, and I would say it's pretty cool that it is written in PHP, because I guess many wouldn't expect this. And also, like you said, it's very scalable. We can talk about this maybe a little bit later, which is also something that you maybe wouldn't assume initially when we talk about PHP. But still, here we are. And yeah, it feels great that PHP was possible to create this with PHP.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm pretty proud of that. So yeah, I don't know if you want me to go into a bit more about that now or whether you've got more questions.
Yeah, maybe let's go a little bit back. And you had the idea. What was the next step for you? Did Taylor just let you go? Hey, Joe, okay, I like this idea. Just do your thing. And then you try to make a proof of concept, or what were the next step? Or what is it like when you have an idea for something? Do you write things down? Do you go right into the code? I guess that's where I'm heading here.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so I wrote the pitch and then Taylor signed it off and said, I think we should explore this. And then basically gave me 2 weeks to really explore the idea, kind of get my head around what the problem is, how we could potentially solve it. And so the way I like to tackle ideas is to really understand what the problem is. And so in this particular problem, the thing that we needed to solve was how to do WebSockets and how to do WebSockets in a scalable way. And I knew what WebSockets were. I'd used them a lot. I understood the concept of them, but I didn't really understand them, how they worked technically. And so actually I channeled my inner Aaron Francis, and this here is a print off of the actual, see, where were we? Over here?
Oh, no way.
Of the
Kind of,
WebSocket specification. So I
no
started
way.
things by kind of reading that beginning
How
to end.
many sides are those?
It is 70 pages. So
Oh my God.
it's not quite the MySQL documentation, but it's close enough. But I really wanted to understand how WebSockets worked and the anatomy of a WebSocket, everything from kind of kicking off that initial HTTP request to the negotiation side of things, which happens between the client and the server before we then have that pipe open for sending data between the client and the server. And even at that point, how that works, how messages are packaged up and sent between the two. So I started off by trying to really get to grips with that and understand what that problem was. And then once I did do that, probably the next phase I went through was reviewing other options which were already available, and seeing how they'd tackled those problems. To see if there was anything that we could kind of pull from them, things that we liked, things that we didn't like, before going ahead and writing our own implementation. And then I spent the remainder of the 2 weeks writing a proof of concept. And by the end of that, I think I had something, it was kind of bare bones, and it was kind of held together with duct tape at that point, but it was working, and something that I could go back to Taylor and say, look, I think this is a viable option if you want to go ahead and continue working on it.
Okay, cool. And okay, so you had this proof of concept. How do you handle such a project? Do you have some kind of to-do list that you use, or do you go just to the code, or did you also pair with others, and were other people involved? What's the kind of structure when you work on something like this at Laravel?
So we knew that we would want to implement the Pusher specification because I guess this is another good opportunity to explain how Reverb works and why it works that way under the hood. But Laravel's broadcasting implementation has always been based off of something called Pusher channels. Pusher channels are a publicly available specification from Pusher, which is a WebSocket provider. And they provide this concept of channels. Now, channels can be public and they can be private. But essentially what a channel is it allows end users, so users of your application in the browser, are able to connect to a channel. And then from the back end, we can then broadcast messages to those channels. So anybody listening on those channels is able to receive those messages that we send from the back end of our application in real time. And so if you've ever written any broadcasting within your Laravel application, you'll know that we have to interact with channels to be able to do that. And so Reverb itself needed to be able to support that Pusher protocol. And so that's really where I started out. After understanding the WebSocket specification, and then when I started to actually write the proof of concept, I then jumped into the Pusher documentation to understand the things that we would need to implement there in order to make Reverb a viable option, or an option to kind of seamlessly integrate with Laravel and the surrounding ecosystem. And so, yeah, so once I knew, so we had a package in the Laravel ecosystem already called Laravel WebSockets, which did something similar to what Reverb does. And so once we realized that we were going to start working with PHP, I kind of took a deeper dive into their project to understand some of the decisions that they made. And then kind of put my own spin on those as I started to work out and start implementing that pusher specification.
So this other package was by Beyond Code, I believe.
Yeah, the Beyond Code package. That's right.
Yeah, also the company that created Hurt for us, which every one of us is very happy that we now have
Eternally
this
grateful.
tool. Yeah. Okay, so we were talking about why PHP. And you said that it was also scalable. Maybe let's talk a little bit also about the scalable factor, because you told it at your talk, and also in on tweets where talked about it. It said that it's very scalable. So how does this work, and why does this work with PHP? Is this obviously working, or is the yeah? Sorry, just go ahead.
Yeah, cool. So under the hood, Reverb is using a package called React PHP, which is inherently very, very fast and very, very performant. So out of the box, we kind of get a leg up with that. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the goals of the project that kind of Taylor and I discussed was that we wanted Reverb. It's only really useful if it can scale to handle kind of production loads. And so there was two kind of factors to that. One is that we wanted it on a single server setup to be able to handle a lot of traffic. So that was one part of the problem. And then the second part of the problem was there's always a theoretical limit to what a single server can handle. So another good
sorry, just a second. When you say single server, you mean when the application itself and the WebSocket server lives on the same server?
Not even that necessarily. So we can probably talk about how you might deploy your Reverb application a little bit later. But even if you just had a Reverb server running on a single server, there is a theoretical limit to how much traffic that server can handle. And that boils down to a couple of things. One is how resource intensive your Reverb server is, how many connections you're managing, how many messages you're sending back and forth between those connections. But we probably have to think about things a little bit differently when we're talking about WebSockets, because they are long-lived connections. When you talk about a standard kind of PHP, Laravel, any type of application, it's very much you send a request to the server processes that request, sends a response back, and then it can deal with more. So that's that initial, it's handled that request and it can move on to do other stuff. With WebSockets, that connection stays open. And in a kind of Unix-based environment, so if you're using, I don't know, Linux to host your application, each connection to the server is handled by an open file descriptor, basically. So every connection opens a new file on the server. And so one of the things you have to consider is how many files your server is allowed to have open at any one time, which
interesting.
Can vary from server to server, and it's a configurable amount, but there's a theoretical limit to how many files you can even have open.
How many are we talking about? Is this like hundreds, thousands, 100 million?
You can set that limit largely to what you want within the resources of the server that you have available. So you kind of, it's not like an exact science. You kind of have to work within the parameters that you have to figure out what the right limit is for your server. But once you get into the kinds of tens of thousands, there's another limit that you can run into, which is open ports on the server. So each connection takes a new port on your server, and there's a limit. I don't remember the exact number, but it's like 50 or 60,000 is the limit that you can actually have. So any given server, regardless of how big it is, on how much traffic it's having to deal with, has a theoretical limit to how many connections it can actually handle. So we wanted to be scalable and performant in a single server environment, but then we also wanted to have the option to be able to scale that out into a multi-server configuration. So if you are dealing with huge amounts of scale, it's still an option to be able to use Reverb.
Okay, so this now means, that Reverb is running on multiple servers.
If you do that, yeah. So it's possible to do both. So 9 times out of 10, I imagine most people are going to have it running on a single server. But if you outgrow that single server, it's possible to have it running across multiple servers. So what you would actually do is you would have all of your traffic from your front end handled by a load balancer. And then the load balancer would distribute that traffic between multiple Reverb servers running behind it. And then Reverb will handle the connections and the messages being sent between those connections on your behalf.
Oh, wow.
So the technical term for that is horizontally scaling. So initially, if you want to add the ability to handle more connections initially, you might vertically scale your server and make it bigger, add more resource to it. Once you hit that theoretical limit, Reverb will allow you to scale horizontally and add more servers to kind of handle that load for you.
Okay, so that's how it makes it scalable for even huge projects and lots of connections.
Exactly right, yeah.
So I know we are also using Reverb at Laravel. Maybe can you talk a little bit about where we're using it or anything that you can share which Taylor allows you to talk about?
Yeah, I think Taylor's already mentioned this himself, so I think I'm free. I think I'm okay to talk about this. It's a nice segue actually, because I mentioned that you might want to run Reverb in the context of your existing application, but you're also free to run it on a single server that is just for handling your WebSocket connections, and that's exactly what we do at Laravel. So actually, pretty early on in the lead up to Laracon EU, where we announced Reverb, we had Reverb powering Forge and Envoy at the same time. And the way that we decided to do that was to have a single server, which basically becomes Laravel's WebSocket server. So any application that we have running, so Forge, Envoy, not yet Vapor, but eventually Vapor, can all communicate with that one single server, and that will handle all of our WebSockets for us. And that's possible because Reverb is also multi-tenanted out the box. So you can define multiple different applications within your Reverb configuration. And using the IDs that are sent, or the credentials that are sent when the user tries to connect and when the backend broadcasts a message back to the users, Reverb is intelligent enough to know which app that message belongs to or that connection belongs to. And so it can segregate that traffic for us. So yeah, so it's possible to do multi-tenancy, and it's possible to have Reverb set up on a single server externally from your application and use that for a separate WebSocket service, basically.
I think that's pretty cool, that because I initially thought that you had one WebSocket server for your application, and for another application you use another one, but you said there you have Laravel, we have one WebSocket server dealing with Forge and Envoy at the same time without any scaling issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even a big server that it's on, and it's barely breathing, that server, at all. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, pretty proud of that performance that we're able to get from it. But yeah, that probably raises a question of what's the right thing for you to do in your application.
Yeah.
How should you deploy your WebSocket server? And I don't I don't have a magical answer to that question. It really sort of
Why?
depends on yeah, it's the classic "it depends" answer. But
I
it
love it.
depends on how much resource you have available to you, how much traffic you're actually dealing with, and what works for you. So for instance, it works for us because we have multiple different applications. So it makes sense for us to keep our WebSocket server completely separate from our application servers. But if you're dealing with one server and it doesn't have, one application on a single server, and it's not at this stage handling lots and lots of traffic, it probably makes sense to run it on the same server. But of course, as your application grows and you start to handle more traffic, you can always move it off.
Switch.
Yeah, you can just switch. It's pretty straightforward to do that.
Okay, nice. Okay, so we're already talking about the final product, but maybe let's go a step back again. What was the biggest challenge? Did you run into any big issues? One point where you said you throw it all away and you skip it, you try something else, or any stories for
You
us?
asked my wife, she would probably say that there was times she wished I'd thrown it away, because there was times when I was so into it that I would wake up in the night dreaming about it and solve
Oh, wow.
problems in my sleep. I don't think I've ever gone that much into that much of a haze when I was that deep into the project. But I never felt like it was at a stage where we wouldn't ever reach the finish line. I think there were problems along the way, but nothing insurmountable. Scaling, I think, was probably the hardest problem to solve because we wanted it to, as I've already mentioned, we wanted it to scale well on a single server, but also be able to have the option to horizontally scale. And yeah, so as I mentioned, we use React PHP, and that's pretty performant out of the box. But I had to dive into the world of Xdebug and profiling, which I'd never really done in such at such scale before. So some of the KGrind files that I was producing were gigabytes in size, and it was quite hard to actually
Oh my
traverse them
gosh.
at any speed to figure out where the bottlenecks were. Thankfully, I didn't have to do that too many times. There was just a couple of occasions when I would do a stress test and I'd committed some code or pushed some code that had not been as performant as I would have liked. So I was able to profile it and iron out those kinks. But that wasn't in itself straightforward because it takes time to run a load test. So you'd find a lot of the time when we were in that phase of trying to kind of eke as much scale out of it as we could, that I would push a small change and then have to run a load test. And we were running load tests using a tool called Locust, which is Python based, and it basically allows you to spin up a load of virtual users and program those virtual users to interact with your application as if they were real humans, and so you can kind of simulate the scale that you might get. And so we were trying to come up with locust tests which would simulate. We often say this at Laravel, but we use Forge quite often as a barometer because it's a kind of typical Laravel application, and so we use that to kind of prove the concept for our projects that they actually perform how we want them to perform. So if we can hit Forge scale, we're relatively happy that that's going to work for a majority of users. And so I was writing locust tests to kind of simulate what Forge traffic might look like. So that involves connecting to the WebSocket server and then periodically disconnecting as if it was like a page change, and then connecting to multiple channels at a time, and then having the back end of my Laravel application broadcasting, huge numbers of messages across those channels to try and figure out when we were hitting bottlenecks that we could then try and iron out. So that was quite challenging in itself. And then once we were comfortable with that, we then had to solve the problem of horizontal scaling, which is quite interesting how we solved that problem. But essentially, we're using the pub sub capabilities of Redis. So if you can imagine, let's say you have 3 Reverb servers, and each one of those servers is having traffic sent to it from our load balancer. Well, if you've got, let's just keep this simple, but let's say we have 3 WebSocket connections. The load balancer is sent the first one to to Reverb server 1, the second one to Reverb server 2, the third one to Reverb server 3. So we've got those connections are going to maintain to those individual servers because, as I mentioned before, they're long-running connections. So they stay connected until either the client or the server disconnects them. So we have those 3, but those 3 might all be listening on the same channel. So we might have a channel called, I don't know, let's call it general. We've got each one of those 3 connections listening to general, and then we have an event sent from our Laravel backend on the general channel. Now, that event is sent from Laravel to our Reverb server over HTTP. So again, that's going to hit our load balancer. And then the load balancer is going to choose which Reverb server to then send that HTTP request to. So in a single server setup, that's fine because we have all of the connections maintained on a single server. In a multi-server setup, that's a little bit more complicated because we hit a single server, we can broadcast that event to the connections managed by that server. But how do we get the event to the other servers, which are in our kind of fleet of Reverb servers? So what we actually do is use Redis PubSub. So that HTTP request comes in to broadcast that message to the general channel. It's received by any one of those 3 servers, and that server will publish that event to Redis. And then each one of those 3 servers is listening for events on that same Redis channel.
Oh, wow.
And so it will then grab the message from Redis and then distribute it to the connections that it maintains on its own individual server. So that's how we do horizontal scaling. And that was, I would say, yeah, there were some headachy moments in there, but it actually turned out to be a really nice solution to solve that problem.
Yeah, I can imagine how hard that is. Is this something that you then just do research and finally you read about? What is it called? PubSub?
PubSub, yeah. I don't
PubSub.
actually know how I ended up there. Um, yeah, that was probably one of those things that I solved during the night and woke up in the middle of the night, wrote on my notepad and hacked on the next morning.
And you, and you felt like pretty amazing, I guess, when you found out that
Felt
this
pretty
could be
amazing
the
when it
solution.
worked, yeah. Yeah.
I think it's funny because I remember also Jess when she talked about Pulse. She also mentioned that she learned a lot about new Redis feature that she was using there in order to fix some of the issues that she had there. So it feels like Redis has a lot of features that people maybe don't know yet, and it's very more
Yeah.
powerful than just the storage
I
system.
think I think we all love Redis for caching, but Redis can do huge amounts more. It's a huge untapped source that we can definitely do more with. I didn't go as deep as Jess, but yeah, I think Jess went pretty deep on that subject. But yeah, there's lots of different things that you can do with it, which are really, really useful.
Okay, cool. And would you say, is this also scaling the part that you're the proudest of, or is there something else in Reaper? Would you say are really happy how this turned out, or about coding this specific part of the application?
I'm definitely proud of that, particularly the horizontal scaling thing. That was a fun thing to solve. But actually, in the lead up to launch, so even after we announced at Laracon EU, I was getting feedback from people that the installation process was a bit confusing at times. When we first had the first iteration of Reverb, we were still referencing kind of pusher environment variables because it made it easy for us to transition. So you didn't have to do anything in your configuration. You could leave your pusher environment variables exactly how they were, and it would just work. Actually, still does just work. But we felt for people who were new to broadcasting and wanted to try Reverb, there was a much better installation story that we could work on. I think actually, Christoph, you were one of the people that said it was quite confusing to you. And then I spoke with Nuno as well internally, who said the same thing. I think James had said the same thing to me. And so thankfully, the Reverb launch was at the same time as the Laravel 11 launch. So we could actually, there was changes happening internally to broadcasting anyway. So we now have the install broadcasting command if you want to enable broadcasting in your application. And so we were able to kind of hook into that and make Reverb kind of a first class citizen of that command. And so you can now install Reverb as part of that, and it will automatically create all of the relevant environment variables for you and do everything needed. So all you have to do at the end of that process is just run PHP artisan Reverb start, and it will just work. And I'm very, very proud of how that turned out, because I don't think that installation procedure can be any more straightforward at this point.
Yeah, I can only agree. I still remember testing it very early and it was already working amazingly, but the installation process, as you mentioned, I found a little bit confusing. And as you said, we have Pusher, the service itself that you can use online, that you can pay also for, and then you have Pusher, the protocol. And sometimes it was confusing. Is this Pusher available now? Are we still using Pusher, the service, or is this for the protocol? And I think you found a really nice way to make this work, and I'm also very happy about the new installation process in general with Laravel. There's a lot of stuff happening now in the back that people don't have to do themselves anymore. And as you said, broadcasting is by default in Laravel 11 not enabled anymore. So you have to install it, and then you automatically get asked, do you want to use Reverb? You just say yes, and you're happy, and you're good to go, and you have a lot of stuff happening already in the application that you don't have to do yourself anymore. So I think this is also a big step with Laravel 11 and this year trying to make the installation process for things even a little bit more easier. And I think it also comes together with prompts, with Laravel prompts, what Chaz worked on. So the whole console workflow and user experience, developer experience is just crazy nowadays in Laravel. And yeah, I really liked how you already used this and made this process as easy as possible.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I've been using Laravel 11 a lot recently on some projects, and every time I think it can't get better, it just gets better. And there's never been, it's better than it's ever been. It's an absolute pleasure writing apps on Laravel 11 right now. So
It's
if you
really
haven't
great.
upgraded yet, go get to it.
Yeah, and you also see lots of experiments with console. We now have Laravel forms Laravel
Oh yeah.
prompts forms by Luke Downing. He contributed this yesterday, I believe, to the new release. So we have now forms in our console interaction, which is also crazy. So this means you can go back and forth between installation processes, which I think it's just amazing. And I hope all package developers will also use it because at the end, the developer experience is just
when you think where we were a few months back, I know we're kind of on a
yeah.
bit of a tangent, but when you think where we were a few months back, and you would have a multi-step CLI form, for want of a better expression, you couldn't even see what you'd entered before. So then
Yeah,
prompts
right.
comes along, and we can see what we entered, and now we can actually go back and change things when we realize we made a mistake. So it's very, very cool, and that's all in a very short space of time.
Yeah, it's like in the last year. I still remember. I think it was Nuno and Termwind, or suddenly they could produce output in the console that had always kind of the same length, or it always looked nice, which we never had. Like in the last 20 years, we never had that, and it was okay. But finally, everything looked so much better, and then it just, with prompts and everything else that was added, and collision, and I don't know what else. It's really crazy what we currently have here as a developer. So
so cool.
it's so cool. Okay, maybe let's talk a little bit more about, so when people want to start with Laravel Reverb, what would you tell them to do? Go straight to the documentation, or?
Yeah, I mean, we're still in beta at the moment, so there's still a few things
All
that
right,
we're
yeah.
ironing out. But there haven't been too many issues, at least issues that we haven't been able to solve. There's been a couple that I've had to solve. But yeah, I would recommend going straight to the Laravel docs and reading them end to end, because you'll get a better idea of what Reverb is and how it can work, and then follow the installation instructions. And it's really not a lot more to it than that. If you never have worked with WebSockets before, or event broadcasting within Laravel, you probably want to read that section of the docs as well to get a better understanding of how it works and the scenarios in which you might want to use it. But as with most things, I would always recommend reading the docs from beginning to end. Print them off if you have to, and take them on holiday with you. But
Yeah, please remember to share those on Twitter so we can see those printed out documentation as well. But I would also add to that Reverb and the whole real-time messaging things in Laravel. You need to know about broadcasting. You need to know about Echo, which is the front-end tool, which you can use in order to interact with a WebSocket server. And in between, you have Reverb. So it's a good idea to take a look at all three of them, because you need to know about all of them. Okay, I got one more question for you. Maybe if you are ready, you out there, everyone, single one of you, if you have questions, please write them now in the comments. I will take a look in a bit. And last question for you, Joe, from my side. So what's the state of Reverb? First, when do you think will it go out of beta? And second, do you feel like it's feature finished, or are there any things that you're already planning, or new ideas that you have? Something that you can share, or something that is secret still?
I have okay, let's start with coming out of beta. I don't know yet. There's still a few things dripping in that I would like to give it a bit more time to see if there's anything else that we may have missed. There's one ongoing issue with local development over HTTPS using Herd or Valet and Google Chrome, which I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to solve, because at this point, I think it's a Chrome issue that I can't do anything about. But I want to spend a bit more time looking into that to see if I can make that a little bit more straightforward to get up and running, and at the very least, update the documentation to at least let people know that they might run into that problem and how to get around it. So I need to do that. And then, I think we want to give it a few more weeks to make sure that nothing else comes in that may be kind of deal breaking. So I don't have a firm date yet, but I don't think we're a million miles away. And in terms of ideas, lots of ideas. I haven't run any of these.
Love it.
I haven't run any of these by the team yet. So I don't know if this is something we've even got appetite to do. And I'd also love to hear if anybody else has any more ideas. But I purposefully built Reverb in a way that could support different protocols. So in theory, there's a world where you could run PHP artisan reverb start -- protocol equals pusher, and that would start a server with the pusher protocol.
Mm-hmm.
But I equally see, or possibly see, a world where we could run. I wasn't expecting to say this today, so I'm not, I'm not even sure if I want to say
Be
this out loud.
careful,
But
whatever you say on the
yeah,
stream,
yeah, it's there forever. I'm
it's
going to say it.
never.
So a world where we could possibly do something like PHP artisan reverb start -- protocol equals WebSocket or WS, and that would give us just a plain WebSocket server. I've already had some feedback on
Mm-hmm.
issues that it would be nice for people to be able to hook in and handle events that aren't pusher specific. But at this point in time, I want the pusher protocol to be just for pusher only, which is why I've kind
Yeah.
of pushed back on that a little bit. But can also imagine a scenario where we have PHP artisan reverb start -- protocol equals livewire, and then suddenly we have
Oh,
something
now we're talking.
that's that's baked into livewire and has livewire specific implementation, which we can then hook into in some way, possibly with an accompanying package for livewire or whatever. But these are things I haven't worked on or haven't even run by anybody yet, so they're just ideas that I've had of how we can extend this and make it more useful moving forward. But yeah, if anybody else has any ideas, then please feel free to let me know.
Yeah, please let you know. But I already love them. So I somehow assumed that you might say, yeah, you're good with how it works and all features are there yet, but it looks like there's a lot coming and you have a lot of more ideas for Reverb. So that's amazing.
Yeah, no promises though, because again,
Yeah, sure.
isn't something I've discussed with anybody else. And you're probably right to say that I think we're kind of feature complete with what our initial goal for Reverb
Yeah.
was. So it may be that we don't do anything more. There's no more features to add from a pusher perspective. There's a couple of minor things we could do, but we don't need to do those. So yeah, this would all be kind of really extending the project, and I'm not sure if that's something that we've got appetite to do at the moment or not. But I think it
Yeah,
could be pretty
sure.
cool.
Okay, are you ready for some questions?
Sure, hit me.
I think this is the best one. Hassan says the interview is perfect, nothing left to ask. So thank you, Hassan. Very nice of you. Let's see, what else do we have? Yeah, lots of positive feedback about Reverb. It's great. People love it. We need to show them as well, of course. Thank you, David. So this is a little bit more technical, but maybe you can answer that. Let's see. How does Reverb handle resource consumption, particularly memory usage under heavy loads?
Yeah, so generally pretty well, but again, it's going to be one of those, or say generally very well, but it's going to be one of those answers where we have to say it depends. And it depends on what you mean by heavy load. But ultimately, you're at the hands of your server. There's a couple of things to consider: is that it's single threaded, so you can, under high traffic, memory generally hasn't been too much seen at high traffic is CPU getting maxed out, and we've had one report of that in particular that we're still looking into with regards to something called a presence channel. Presence channel is like a private channel, so you have to be authorized to access it, but you get a few things like lifecycle hooks. So anytime somebody joins the channel, anybody else connected to that channel is notified of the fact. And if you have lots of people connected to those channels, we have had reports of high CPU usage. So under certain circumstances, Reverb will use more CPU. So it depends a little bit on your workload. But yeah, there are scenarios where it can increase CPU. But generally, like for instance, if I use Forge again as an example, like I said, that server is barely breathing. I think for Forge and Envoy alone, we sit at around 5 to 10% CPU, like at all times.
wow.
And that is just broadcasting
like
events
nothing.
between channels all day long.
And we can imagine that there is a lot going on Forge, especially, and Envoy.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of Forge and Envoy, every time an event changes on yours, or every time you're interacting with your server and an event happens on the Forge server, it's broadcasting that to the front end, every well, every user who's using Forge at the same time is connected to the server, and then there's messages flying back and forth all the time. So generally, in
Crazy.
most cases, it handles it really, really well. But there's always going to be cases where you're doing things that are slightly different to what we would perhaps consider normal. Like I mentioned, when we were load testing it, we were working to that kind of Forge blueprint. So outside of that, there may be things that happen, but generally, I think memory and CPU consumption is really, really good.
Cool. Oh, there is another one by our friend Marcel from Beyond Code. Hey Marcel, what was your experience with writing long-running PHP applications using React PHP, as it's quite different to a traditional PHP client app? Yeah, that's a good one.
It's quite a head shift because anything you do, which is why we had to kind of make everything as efficient as possible, because anything that you do blocks any other connection from, or any event that you need to send to any other connection from happening. So you have to always think about efficiency in ways I'd never had to consider before. So it's definitely different to thinking about that kind of, as I mentioned before, that PHP or a request coming to your application, PHP processing that, not really caring too much because it's just going to process it, send it back, and close that connection down. You've got to be more wary of the things that you're doing when you're hanging on to those connections for long periods of time.
Is it one of those tools that once you have started using it, it's like changing how you think about stuff and how you can write things? So is this something like where you would say, oh, the next thing, this maybe I would do with React PHP?
I definitely think there's things I learned from it which I can take to. Would I use React PHP for other things?
Yeah.
I definitely would use it. I think it's a great tool. I think there's a very, I definitely would use it. I don't know in what scenario I'd use it. If I was going to build an app from the ground up, I would still probably use Laravel because that's what I know and love. But there are cases when you could use React PHP, and there's different use cases for it that are different to traditional web applications. Sure. Although you can still use it for web applications as well. So, it's just. Yeah, but in also answer to your question, I think it also made me think about how I can do things differently in the things that I'm programming on a day-to-day basis and do things more efficiently, which is pretty cool. That was a nice side effect of working on that project.
Yeah, I think those are the little extras or little wins that you gain by trying something new, and then it relates to something else that you do. So it's great that this already helped you in other ways as well.
Definitely.
What about this one by Daniel? Any plans for another driver on the other than Redis, given the Redis news moving? Oh,
it's a bit fresh, so not right now.
Okay, so there are plans for getting Redis as a paid service, I believe, something like this. Is this what this is about?
Yeah, I think that's basically going from open source to closed. I don't know the details hugely, and it's still quite fresh. So in the answer to the question, it's not something that we have plans to change yet, but possibly moving forward.
All right, thanks. Then a very important one, but it's a good one. Let's see, what else do we have here? What do you aim for? More technical one or more general one? Any?
I'm happy with either.
What about this one by Rehards? Translate, maybe it was already answered. Why not allow to emit message received for all messages regardless of payload? Do you know what he means?
I did touch on this kind of towards the end, where I said that we have built Reverb with the possibility to have different protocols. I think what this question is aiming at is, why does it have to be a push a specific message? Why can't we act on anything? Because we fire off a message received event, but we don't fire off that message received event unless it's a push a specific message. And the answer to that question is kind of what I hinted at already, is that I really want at the moment to be pusher specific at this time, but I see a world where we can potentially add new protocols moving forward.
Yeah, I guess maybe something also interesting when you work at something like this at Laravel. It's not like your typical side project, your little package that you create. You do this for Laravel. A lot of people are going to use this. There will be a lot of use cases, a lot of different expectations. So I would assume that it's maybe difficult to still stay focused to just make it work as the initial idea and not get distracted by all the different other things that you could do to, I don't know, please everybody. Is this something that you felt while building it? Was there this kind of pressure, or?
I think it's hard to, when people put work in, to suggest changes that you can make, to say no to those changes. But sometimes they're very, very small changes, but over time, those small changes incrementally build up and can become bigger changes. So in that particular example, it would not be difficult at all to be able to hook into that message received event. But A, it takes it away from just being a pusher specific implementation. And B, I mentioned as well that because we're using React PHP, anything that we do, if we allow users to hook into that message received event, and users do things like, I don't know, start interacting with their database or whatever, that becomes a blocking action that prevents other things within the event loop, which handles all of those connections for Reverb to be able to process other requests.
Yeah.
And so from a support perspective, it becomes more difficult to diagnose those things. So we just want to limit the kind of surface area of that, particularly at this stage. I wouldn't necessarily rule it out in the future, but my future idea for that is to probably do something, a different protocol implementation completely.
Yeah, sure. I find this also very interesting to talk about, because we at Laravel, Taylor and others, have to say no to a lot of pull requests, feature requests, changes, because sometimes it's just a little addition to the framework. But yeah, again, the team have to maintain this for like forever, and we have to be very careful with what we're doing here, and we want to maintain this in the best possible way. And that's why it's sometimes hard, where we wished we could say to everyone yes to support everything, but and in reality that's not possible, and you have to be very careful if you want to maintain such big packages for such a long time. Okay, what's the time? I think we got time for one more. Let's see.
Make it a good one.
The pressure is on. Okay, maybe this one. Is there a difference in performance if we use Reverb as a traditional app or in a container app?
I presume by container app you mean like a Dockerized application?
I assume
I
so.
haven't actually tested Reverb in a Docker container, so I don't know, but I don't believe if your container is configured correctly, there should be any difference.
There probably shouldn't be any difference, right?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, let's see if I can find another one. Oh, I don't think that's a question, but there's some very good feedback. I've actually used Reverb for an on-air layer for a television station, handling around 200 users per minute. Each is participating in a trivia, all one single 4 gigabit server. Just one.
That's very cool.
That's nice. Thank you, Hasan, for sharing this. We really appreciate it. I think especially...
I love to see really different ways that Reverb can be used.
Yeah, so please, everybody, if you're using Reverb in any interesting way, please tell Joe about it on Twitter. I'm pretty sure you can put a little smile on his face every time.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so I think we're closing it off then. So thank you very much, Joe, for taking the time, being the first special guest here in this new interview series. I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot of new things. I hope everybody as well. Please, for everybody watching, I like to do this again. I hope you liked it. So please let me know about who else from the Laravel team should I bring on, and which package or product should we talk about. Please let me know in the comments. Joe, anything else you want to mention? Maybe where can people find you? Anything else you're currently working you want to share or plug here? This is your
Yeah, I guess
minute.
this is my moment. Okay.
Yeah, it's the moment.
So you can find me I'm only really on Twitter. So you can find me, I'm at _ Joe Dixon, because Joe Dixon was gone when I joined all those years ago. And one other thing to mention about Reverb is that actually, well, not Reverb, but broadcasting more generally, is I actually added a new pull request to the framework yesterday, which got merged, which will basically allow you to broadcast events from your application, from the back end of your application, without actually having to create a new event. So in your app events folder, you don't actually need to create a new event. You can we're calling them anonymous events. You can just fire them from anywhere in your application, which is pretty cool. I was pretty happy that one got merged. So check that out. That will
Nice
be,
one.
hopefully, it's been merged, so it'll be released on Tuesday next week.
Perfect. Probably I will do a video about it.
Oh yeah, that'd be nice. We'll go full circle.
Yeah, that's what we do. So thank you again, Joe. It was lovely having you here. And thank you for sharing all the things. And yeah, have a good day and see you at work probably again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.